All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And I am really excited to be talking with my guest here today. It is Dan from Dan Explores Books. Hello, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Well, I'm excited that you're here. You have been putting out some really entertaining Malazan content on your channel. You're doing a read through, something that is fairly unusual these days on YouTube, which is you're doing a close reading. You're giving us a lot of updates. What inspires you to make a video when you make it? How do you decide I'm making a video about this chapter or this section, or how do you operate there on Dan Explores Books?
Well, it I didn't do it for the first two books. At first, I started this channel a year ago thinking, well, I'm reading books anyway. I'll do some reviews and things.
Yeah.
And but then it went quite dormant because I was focused on writing. I had my family. It was hard to balance a million things.
Yeah.
And then I was reading through, I'm not going to do spoilers on anything for people who would, but I was reading through Memories of Ice, and I was in my daughter's tap dance studio. I think I was in the second chapter of Memories of Ice, and this is when the channel, I wasn't even thinking about the channel. I thought maybe if something comes up, I'll throw a review or something. Or actually, oh, sorry, before that, I did do a review at the end of Dead House Gates, and I thought, here's a review of something I thought really hit me. Great, I'm going to continue with it, and I was just going to leave it at that and do nothing. But really early on in Memories of Ice, as I heard tap dancing in the background, it was just hitting me. This thing, there's kind of a moment where someone gets kind of pulled in to something,
Yeah.
and right then I thought I gotta do something with this. And later that day, I did a full kind of just a talk through. I didn't know how it was going to go. It was just audio only, more like a podcast, just talking through some of my thoughts because I felt like there's so much. I found a lot of metaphor. That's kind of what I like to tackle on my channel. I'm really into that.
Hmm.
And I thought, man, Steven Erickson is really almost like somebody from another time who's tackling all these big metaphors and things. And I thought it was just great. So sometimes I will go through and do every chapter like I did with Memories of Ice. But generally now it's just if something really hits me,
Yeah.
if there's some kind of concept, and but I don't want to go through and go scene by scene on anything because I think
Right.
yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So this is your first read through of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still getting surprised by stuff as you read
Oh my
along.
gosh. Sometimes it's amazing to get to the end of a chapter and then going back and seeing what you could talk about, and it's amazing all the stuff that's just packed into some of these.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And I'm in
It is
Reaper's Gale now.
awesome. Yeah, I love Reaper's Gale. And my favorite is yet to come for you, the final book. But oh man, there's some great stuff ahead for you, and I'll be curious to see some of your reactions, particularly when you get to the end. But there's some stuff that will make your jaw hit the floor, and just it's funny because I have read the Malazan Book of the Fallen twice now. The second time I read it, I did it as part of a read through of everything Malazan. So I read, the Carcantus trilogy, the two books that are published in it. I read Esselmont's books, and a lot of these, most of them I discussed with AP Canavan along the way. So we were really getting into the nitty gritty of it. And we were fortunate enough to be able to talk to both Steven Erickson and Ian Esselmont. And there were still things I was finding as I was reading that I hadn't noticed before. And that's just fantastic. I mean, I loved it the first time I read it. And one of the first videos I made on my channel was, and to this day, I think it's my second most watched video, is why Malazan Book of the Fallen is among the best of fantasy. And so, yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, I mean, this is a series that is Erickson. I like the way you said that he does stuff that seems kind of like a lot of people aren't doing these days. he does stuff that's very literary as well as fantasy, as well as what we call genre fiction. I love that he just combines those things. He doesn't see a need to separate what people refer to as somewhat snobbishly as literary fiction versus
Mhm.
genre fiction. And I love that he does things that are perhaps more typical of what we call literary fiction in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So it's just it's to me it's just great literature. I don't care what the genre is. It's just great writing. So
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I say he's kind of like a guy out of time, it almost feels like he's able to have sometimes I feel like it's more like an oral history. Some of the
mm,
stories that he's saying, they're
yeah,
very symbolic. And if he kind of draws your eye towards some things, if you go towards the prologue and really slow down with them, he will have some different concepts that are with Memories of Ice. In House of Chains, he had different things. He draws, chains. He draws your eyes with all sorts of things. And in Reaper's Gale here, I've noticed some new things that every time he kind of brings up this word, it's like, hey, pay attention because this is what this concept is.
yeah,
And I kind of, it feels very fractal in some way where
yep,
it's like he will he will deal with a concept on a macro level and then on a micro level and then with this person and this person. And you would think that maybe it's just too much dealing with this one metaphor, but it's like he's striking it at a million different angles. And I just love that.
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, he's used that word before himself, fractal. So yeah, you're absolutely on the right track there. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, his prologues are, I mean, one thing that prologues can do is they're signals to the reader what you should be paying attention to, are the themes that we're going to be exploring in the rest of the book. He always does that. And the
Mhm.
epigraphs too, the poems and
Oh
everything.
my gosh.
Go
I've done
back and
videos
read.
just of epigraphs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like I would be sitting on my couch and right here I'm under my daughter's bedroom. And if it's at 11 at night, I can't come in here and I'll just stick my phone up and go, this epigraph was amazing. And then do this, there's just so much to talk about. You could pinpoint one little line or you could talk about the plot and stuff, but it's just amazing how it's like, look how he went to this metaphor here. But it's just amazing,
it is.
amazing epigraphs. And usually I just skip, I don't skip over them, but sometimes it's just in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's good to actually finish the chapter and then go back and reread the epigraph, and then it makes a lot more sense, And then you realize, oh, that's what he was doing there. So, man, I don't know if everyone
I,
has patience for that, but yeah,
I think that's part of the reason why some people have been enjoying what I've been trying to find here is because I
yeah,
will go through and just by the nature of what I'm doing, I have to go back and re-look at things. And I've been, you know, I've been highlighting them like crazy. So
oh,
just
look
by
at you.
I know, because I just highlight them and I'm just will have my book out. And after I've highlighted them, it's actually on that second pass through that I will do on the video that some of these insights will come out. And I think a lot of people would come with the same insights. It's just by the nature of going back.
Mhm.
And I can't wait for a reread, by the way.
Oh my goodness,
I
yeah.
am signed up for 2 rereads for sure.
Yeah. 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 No, it's a series I think that you could keep rereading the rest of your life and still find new stuff. So
Mhm.
it's that rich. And add in the other books too, by the way, all the other
Yeah,
Malazan series. And oh my goodness,
I
it
did.
gets,
I did the Night of Knives when they said to do that, and I thought it was fun. I mean, it was
yeah,
a little Malazan light, but it was. Yeah, I'm still so excited about the world here.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I just love it. I'm actually reading an Esselmont book right now, Forge of the High Mage, which is his fourth book in the Paths to Ascendancy. It is so wonderful to be back in the Malazan world. I just love it.
Which one does that follow?
So
Because I know there's some Corbel Brooch and Beauchelane
that's
sort of
all
stuff.
Erickson. Erickson is the one who wrote the novellas, the Bocalane and Kerbal Broach novellas.
Hmm.
And those are very kind of absurdist humor, I mean, you take Malazan humor and you distill it out, and just make that into a novella, and you've got the Bookland and Corbel Broach books.
Awesome.
And then you've got Esselmont's got the novels of the Malazan Empire. There are 6 of those, and Night of Knives is the first. And then you've got Esselmont's Paths to Ascendancy, and now there are 4 of those out. The 4th one just came out. Actually, it hasn't come out here in the States yet, but it's out in the UK. And those are Dancer's Lament, the Dead House Landing, and Kellanved's Reach, and now this new one is Forge of the High Mage. So these are basically the Paths to Ascendancy are here's how the Malazan Empire came about. So you go back a generation or two to find out how it all happened, in the first place. So it's really cool to get all of that. I just love it.
Yeah, in the 3rd book, I started asking people, "Hey, when do we get to the Malazan Empire?" And they said, "Well, it's kind of not. It's kind of not in there." I thought, well, okay, he couldn't fit it into 10 massive books, but I'm super excited to get to that. And I mean, you can enjoy this for the metaphors and things, which I like, but it's also this great grand plot that's going on.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think strikes me that just makes me in love with this series are those little moments between a couple characters that you thought, oh, I haven't thought of them for a long time. At the end of Bone Hunters, I won't talk about anything there, but there's a character who's sort of significant around the end of Deadhouse Gates, and has another kind of little moment with somebody who sort of opens up the POV in Bone Hunters, this girl. And I thought, man, I would have never thought you could have these two together, and it's almost like this father dynamic, and I just love that. He does relationships so well.
Yeah.
And in Memories
Friendships.
of Ice too, there's kind of the mother character who's having a little bit of a bad go of that, and has a very
to put it mildly, yes. Yeah.
has a really kind of strange circumstance. But I mean, I've seen at least echoes of that.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how we see people start to just kind of try to help her out a little bit. And it's not really a main part of the story, but I think, man, that was such a sweet little page that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I will remember that.
Yeah, there are all these moments of humanity in the series that just hit you in unexpected ways. It's really brilliant. That's what a great writer can do, is to give you these images, these moments of connection, where something leaps out between the characters, and also between the characters and you, the reader. And it's such a great thing. That is one of the things I love about the series. Yeah.
So good. So good.
Yeah. Great stuff. So you're covering the Malazan Book of the Fallen right now on your channel. And I get the sense that you are a very broad reader, that you're someone who likes to read lots of different stuff, that you're not just a fantasy reader, or that you're somebody who goes kind of where you want to go. So I don't know if that you could confirm whether my impression is correct or not. Okay, you're nodding, so good. Yeah.
Yep.
So if you would give us a sense of what you see your channel as being all about, and also where you think you might go in the future with the channel. Do you want to stick to just fantasy, or are you going to be doing other stuff on your channel? And we got to get to your writing at some point too, if you're open to talking about that.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I definitely have questions for you about that.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, congratulations for your next one being out yesterday. I still have my package where I ripped it out and I opened it about 2 hours ago, so it got here.
Wow, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have that, and I went ahead and I read the prologue, by the way, just before I get into my channel thing. And I thought, I wish authors would send out a little video in between of where we were at. But the prologue in number 2 made that very clear where some of our people were at, and it started with a bang, which I thought that's awesome. But I'm right in the middle of Reaper's Gale. I didn't want to get hooked in quite yet.
Yeah.
So it'll have to wait for just a minute. But
Oh, you can make me wait for Erickson. I guess
oh,
that's
I'm so excited though. I'm so excited.
cool. I'm so glad to
Uh
hear it.
yeah, yeah. For me, actually fantasy is kind of a later thing for me.
Yeah.
Growing up, I had my friends that were really into sports and stuff, so I was really caught up in that as a elementary school, junior high. But I always had my friends who were reading things like Brian Jacques and Robin Hobb and some of these other. And I thought, oh man, that all of that stuff seems so cool to me.
Huh. Huh.
And I would get into, I mean, we would have video games, and I always loved character design and things like that. Yeah, but I never really got into reading fantasy for a long, long time. And I've just been kind of remedying that recently.
Huh.
Actually, it is historical nonfiction that has been kind of my comfort food
Yeah.
growing up.
You see,
Yeah. So
big history buff. Okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that started with my mom. Probably, if we went way to the start, it probably started around our dinner table. We had a big family. We had a big map behind us, one of those big National Geographic ones that kind of fit on a whole wall. And my mom, who's she did history for schooling and stuff.
Cool.
She told me a story, or told us a story about Queen Boudica when
Oh, yes.
I was maybe 4 or something. And it was at the dinner table, and she had all the Queen Boudica's uh, people represented by peas, and the Roman legion was represented by a big spoon, and
Whoa.
it was just carnage everywhere. And I just thought, this is the best thing in the world. So really, the
Wow.
reason I'm a broad reader, I just like stories wherever they are. And there's so many great stories from history. My daughter's the same way. Rome is really kind of my thing. So I
Cool.
just love stories wherever they are. But fantasy stories really are kind of new to me, as in terms of actually reading it.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, you and Alan should get along. Alan from the Library of Alexandria, since he's also a Roman history, Greek kind of guy. But yeah, that's awesome. So now that we started to get into that, I love that story of your mother, by the way, and the peas and the butter knife and all that. That is just
Mhm.
fantastic. Now that we started to get into that, I think it's time for the standard question that we have here on Dear Dr. Fantasy, going on the premise or theory, I guess you could call it, that you are what you read. What are some of the formative reads that you would consider to be absolutely character making in your case? What are some of the great stories that really stuck with you over the years that you feel like can help explain who you are?
Well, we'll go past Garfield and Goosebumps, even though it's in there. It's
It's in
definitely in
there.
there.
It's in there.
Uh, actually, um, I have this series here, and everyone knows about the first book, but most people don't know that it's a quartet. And it was maybe one of the first books I really kind of fell in love with. And it's such a lame book to so many people, but we read it in school. It was The Giver.
Oh, okay.
So, The Giver, the thing that really caught my attention there was that these names sort of meant something to each of these people. And
Mhm.
I've just been, what is the word? Etymology. I just get obsessed with that. And as
Yeah.
we go back, we can enjoy all of these different books. A lot of them kind of stand on the shoulders of what's before it. You could
Sure.
either go all the way down to the bedrock and go to the oral histories and things, or you can find things that are just not even dusted off yet and
Yeah.
find some of those same great themes. But this one, this is really a big part of me, and it's a quartet. I just, for some reason, it just was foundational and kind of sparking really some intrigue of literature. It got me away from Goosebumps and Garfield, so
Okay. Well, that's a
it
step.
started things off.
That's a step for sure.
Mhm.
That's cool. That's very, and you read that when you were how old?
Uh, I don't know. It was in elementary school, but
Right.
probably 10 or something like that.
But somewhere around there is when you were awakened to the potential of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Yeah. So from there, what else? What are some other big reads that you can recall from high school, college, etc.? Or um,
Uh, well, I did the whole Harry Potter thing when it
okay.
came out, and that
Yeah.
was, it was a big thing for a lot of people. But I wasn't reading tons and tons of stuff at that time. Now I was still enjoying history, and I would always look at the map and try to find out more and ask my parents about things. But really, I was the stuff that I was enjoying as far as fiction was in part with it was in movies and things
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
But growing up further along, let's see.
I am
I
curious too about the
started.
history, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
Is there a particular part of history that is especially interesting to you, or is
I
it
have all
just
my books close by.
everything? Yeah.
No, yeah, no, it definitely is a certain thing. I took a Western civilization course when I went to university.
Yep.
Liked it so much I took it twice. So
Wow.
no,
Cool.
I kind of didn't pay much attention that first semester, so I had to take it. But I really did like it, and it was. I always had an interest in like the Greeks and the things, but it's actually classical antiquity,
Okay.
specifically around the Romans and Carthage, and the Macedonians, and I love that area
Cool.
of
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
So it's gotten me familiar with some of the oral stories there. A lot of Old Testament sort of things kind of get implanted into that, and you can see some of that how it has influenced some of the other things that are all behind me here. So
Nice.
if a
Nice.
lot of people enjoy things like Tolkien or with you with Beowulf is kind of like a foundational thing. I like maybe something a little more bedrock, but I'm missing a lot of the pieces in between.
Sure.
But yeah,
I
as
can
I've
see
gone through
where,
Malazan, I love looking back to some of those things that I
exactly.
recognize there.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say I can see where Malazan would appeal. That the military aspect of Malazan in many ways would be a natural magnet, I think, for you in that case, right?
And I got really into maybe sci-fi before I got into fantasy. Like I was reading these are my kind of classical pretentious books over here. And then I have my sci-fi, which is kind of my comfort food other than just history books.
Nice.
And but man, fantasy has grabbed me just like a certain someone was grabbed in chapter 2 or something in Memories of Ice, whenever that was.
Yeah, yeah. Nice.
Hmm.
Awesome. I love it. So, it where do you feel like you might go from here once you finish Malazan? Or do you think that far ahead, or is it just are you thinking future for your channel? What plans do you have?
Well, I would have been reading it regardless, but since people have kind of glommed onto it, uh, then I thought, I'm going to keep going and doing the videos. It's been great to interact. If you want to become really niche, start a YouTube channel on book 3 of Malazan. Uh,
Where you
so
do these deep dives and
yeah,
punctuating.
that's where
Yeah.
yeah. But everyone's been so great. So
Yeah.
I don't really know. This is secondary. A lot of these things that I'm reading is because I think it would influence something that I've been working on myself.
Uh-huh.
I have my wall here of things I've been working on for the last few years, and I thought, well, I'll give this Malazan a try. And really, I like put the pen down and thought, okay, I gotta just do this for a little while. But
Cool.
I don't know where this is going to go. I mean, I assume if people were interested, I would keep doing these explorations into other books. That's why I call it explores, because I want to. I mean, we get a lot of reviews, but I'd like to, if people are really into their series and they want me to go and see what can be found. I think a lot of people like to see people's reactions, and
Yeah.
even if it's just some blurry thing. Like I've done videos in my car just driving down the highway, talking about, and but some people are okay with that. But I understand that if that is not your thing, and if it's a little too niche, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, really, this is a secondary thing, hoping that I can finally get this other kind of thing out that I would love to get out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there are some great series in fantasy and science fiction. I'm reading Book of the New Sun right now by Gene Wolfe, and
Hmm, that's
man,
back here.
that is something that I think I could spend a lot of time trying to figure out. You know, there's a lot going on in there. I bet Realm of the Elderlings would be a good one for you to go through.
I've done the first one and I thought, oh, I love this, but I'm gonna try out some more things. That was really early on in when I was. I think that was maybe the fourth or fifth thing I picked up, but I wasn't gonna go down a big
Okay.
road yet.
So you did
But I can't wait.
The Farseer trilogy, or just the first book?
Just the first book.
Oh, okay, Assassin's Apprentice. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool,
Mm-hmm.
nice, yeah. So yeah, there are some great series that you could pick up and do something similar. I think these kind of fun, close readings and all of that. So, well, I'll be interested to see what you do. Now, I am dying to ask you about your own work because we've gotten little mentions here and there. You've been working on something for a while, on something
Mm-hmm.
that you're writing, and don't feel like you have to talk about it, to talk about as much or as little as you like. But I am curious to hear what you've been up to and what you're hoping to accomplish with it.
Well, at first, I just was going to do, I do a lot of just silly stuff on the channel, so that's a big part uh of kind of me. But I wanted to do this stupid uh little children's book for my two daughters.
Oh, how nice. I like that.
And,
Yeah.
I thought it was, I think the whole the core of it, I had this main core thing that I wanted somebody to get to. And now it has turned into maybe the one of the big things in like the third book of a big epic sort of thing. So now it's kind of becoming, it just grew legs. I don't know if you had this same kind of thing where you have an idea and it just grows quicker than you're even able to hold on to everything.
Yeah.
But I just loved where it was going. And I've always wanted to write. I've tried to write like history books about Rome and things like that. But if you've ever tried to write anything like that, you soon find that you get lost in the context of what comes before. And I thought, also, I'm not a PhD historian or anything like that. So I thought maybe I'd be better at just talking. But yeah, this fiction thing I've been working on, and sorry, I ramble.
No, it's good. I like it.
Uh so it started with this one absurd moment with uh I can't mention it exactly, but it's an absurd moment with this guy that has this absurd affliction, and then it turned into something that really I've spent a lot of time with these characters that I've cast into it, and I think, man, I like this is I want to be able to share this part. At first, I wanted to just get a few ha-has, but I thought, man, I've really grown to love a few of these people in it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of great stories. One of my very favorite writers, I think it's fair to say, Tolkien, started out in a similar kind of way, with The Hobbit being more or less something he was writing with his children in mind. And then that got attached to this previous work that he had been doing on which we know as the Silmarillion, but really he'd been
Mm-hmm.
developing this mythology and everything for years and years and years. And where we see the whimsical children's story wedded to this much more ancient mythology is in Lord of the Rings, and that's this, and that was supposed to be a sequel to The Hobbit. That was supposed to be similar in tone to The Hobbit, but obviously became something else,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty cool how, for some writers, these things just develop organically, and the stories just sort of calls you, doesn't it? It sort of pulls you and tells you what to do, and you have to listen when that happens, right?
Yeah, the problem is when uh, it calls you one way, then all of a sudden you're looking back on the last 4 months and you think, well, I've just Rubik's Cube ruined half of this other stuff. Like that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Just gathering all these things that I think, like opening up this box and exploring this little topic, putting it safely here and trying to trust that you won't, that it's okay to go over to these other little areas.
Yeah.
It's just been so fun. Did your series start with any kind of, what was the little spark that got it going? And
Well,
is that spark still a part of the series, or has it morphed into something else?
yeah, I guess there are a couple answers to that. I mean, I knew since I was maybe 12 or so that I wanted to write fantasy after reading
Hmm.
Lord of the Rings. I just had this idea that, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to do that to people, what Tolkien did to me. That was sort of put in my head at that around that age, but I didn't get around to actually writing until I was in my early 30s. So I actually started my trilogy in 2004. So yeah, that's been a long time.
Hmm.
But the initial kind of catalyst, I guess, in some way. I mean, I did before I wrote story, I did do a lot of world building. I drew a map, and I had this whole history and mythology and everything, about 100 pages of that. So, I just wanted to have a place to live in before I thought about the story. But the one thing that really, I guess you could say, I started with was the name Day Raven, which actually I stole from Beowulf. There is a throwaway character who just is this Frankish warrior that Beowulf kills during
Hmm.
his career, and that's it. And the guy's name is Day Raven, although in Old English it's
I got it here.
Raven. Yeah, you found it.
Hmm.
So I thought to myself, that is such a cool name.
And when that came up in your book, I thought, I mean, that sparked the same sort of intrigue that I just like. I
Yeah,
thought that is such a sort of, there's just that dichotomy of ravens are usually associated with this dark and stuff, and then there's
yeah,
day. And I thought,
yeah,
I wonder if he came up with this or if this is something else. And I did notice in another thing that you mentioned that it was from Beowulf. So when I read this a couple days ago for my first time, thinking I'm doing my due diligence, I didn't
nice.
notice it at first. I went back and thought I didn't see any day raven in there, but yeah, I had to go up and Google. Uh, I Googled it and I saw that it was a different. Yeah, he was just kind of a throwaway character in this.
Yeah, I mean, what a waste of a cool name. So
Hmm.
I needed to give this guy, or that name at least, a story.
Would it have the same sort of translation though? Does it have that meaning, or does it
Oh
just
yeah,
sound like that?
yeah. No, it literally in Old English, Die Raven, simply means day raven is the
Hmm.
meaning, and most Old English names mean that, right? Like my middle name is Edward, which means treasure guardian, right? They all mean something like that, Most of our names mean something, so.
Right, right.
But yeah, so I just thought, cool name. He needs a story, and the Raven part definitely, and the dichotomy with the day suggested a few things to me. I think that's you probably could conjecture about early on, and even in the way of a den. And there is a Raven that appears,
Yeah.
plays a role. So yeah, and ravens, of course, they have a lot of mythological resonance. They appear in Norse mythology and in various other mythologies. So I probably was somewhere or other that was swirling around in my head too, I guess.
Isn't it generally a bad omen to see a
It
raven?
can it can be,
But
yeah.
the day part, I mean, you could think that's a flip on that. I don't know.
You could, yeah. So, I mean, the most famous ravens in Norse mythology are Odin's two that perch on him and that he uses as messengers, and thought and memory is what their name means. But and they are seen as harbingers of death, primarily because probably like other birds,
Carrion
carrying
birds.
birds, they appear during battles, right? So
Hmm.
in Old English poetry, every battle, it's formulaic. So in every battle, there's, at a certain point, the wolf and the eagle and the raven show up to, eat the corpses and that sort of thing.
Right. Right. And not to digress, but the way that is used in Malazan as well is just awesome.
Oh
All
my
the
goodness.
ravens and things.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
And
Erickson.
especially with the theme in Reaper's Gale with some of this kind of pulling apart, it's just awesome.
Yeah, I think I mean, Erickson and Esselmont do some really just out of this world stuff with their world building. It's just tremendous. And of course, they gamed it for years and years and years together. which is why a lot of those friendships are so vivid, I think, because you can almost hear echoes of, I think, Erickson and Esselmont gaming together and just having a blast. So yeah.
Now, does as far as your book, I my favorite sentence in your first one is a 2-word sentence that it's about a person who's doing something that sounds a lot like his name. Can you think of what that would be? It's this. Well, I don't even know if I'm allowed to
You
say
tell
these
me
different
what
names.
chapter it is, I might be able to
It's
guess.
one of these dwarves,
Oh, okay.
and he spat, and I just thought it's so funny because he sounds just like. Anyway, I just thought it's not the most poetic thing, but it just made me laugh. Like
I
I
like it.
I'm I would have been so excited to have a guy named Hlock.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just
It's
thought I'd
actually
mention
it's
that.
actually an Old Norse name that I stole.
Mm,
So a lot of the names are from Old English and Old Norse, and that one is the name, I believe, not a prominent name, but it might be the name of a giantess, like a female giant. And I thought it sounded good for this character. So yeah.
hmm
Wow.
Yeah, I liked the theme of exile that you've had in your books,
Yeah, that's
and
very,
that's
very deliberate. Yeah.
and so many of these characters have experienced it in some different way. Some obviously driven out when they were very young, and we have that with some of these main characters, and one that is kind of driven out of her old life into this new one where you think, well, that would be actually a pretty good deal. But yeah, it's very a nuanced approach to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of it because exile is so linked to identity, especially in older cultures where the worst thing that could happen to you is to be exiled. It's worse than death because your whole identity is wrapped up in your group. You're part of that. So to
Mhm.
be excised from that is to have part of you ripped away from you. And so it's a theme that I it was very important in Old English poetry, obviously, and in Old Norse tales and most older cultures. So I thought it would be fun or interesting to look at it. And I even have some of the bardic songs in there deal with the theme
Mhm.
of exile as well. So this tale of Alfshin and Wilfar, which gets told in little pieces, it's fundamentally about exile as well, and identity, and how even when we are exiled, even we are even if we are excised from that our origin culture, there's still somehow it lives in us. It's a
Mhm.
very tenacious thing, and it's hard to, or maybe even impossible to, you can't just rip away parts of your identity, can you? I mean,
Right. And I love that sometimes in these stories, something that is often done, sometimes from father to son, is they leave something with them just to kind of remind them, almost like their father or their mother or someone is there while they're off in this other place just to remind them. And I thought that was great. I thought it was great.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had certain things I wanted to explore besides exile. There's, othering, and how, I guess, we and it is related to exile too, because once you're pushed out of your home culture and you start to be familiar with another culture, even if you had previously negative thoughts about that culture, the more you're exposed to it, you realize, oh, actually, maybe we have a lot in common here. Yeah, we're different in this way, but
Yeah. And it
actually,
opens up for some choices and things. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you
yeah,
off.
no, go ahead. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it seems like once they finally leave that place, now they can make choices of where they are going to go. And I think we all think in your first book it's kind of getting somewhere.
yeah.
And they make some interesting choices to just diverge from that path, which is yeah, very, very interesting. Do people often I wonder whose people's favorite characters are. I really like this one priest. Who is that? Arna?
Arna is the older one.
Right.
So he's the one who, well, I can't say too much without
hmm
spoiling anything, but
Well, I really like that guy, and I would like to know more about what happened, his life
In the
coming up to
past.
this.
Yeah.
I
In the
don't know if
past.
we're going to get that here or in some other kind of standalone thing, but that I think that dynamic of his earlier life would be awesome.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, I can say, well, can I? I guess I can. I don't think it's a spoiler at all. But yeah, he and Bledla and Galdor, the last one you don't actually meet in the first book.
Hmm.
They
Thought I
were
was going to meet him.
they were all in the monastery at the same time. And so they were once upon a time a trio of friends. So yeah, they kind of go way back. But yeah, there's definitely some stories, and you'll get more of Arna's not fully explored, but you'll get more about that in the second book. You will get some more of his backstory, a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and opening up to some of the magic of what's going on, and it seems like it influences a lot of people, but everyone just has a different way of viewing it or naming it and understanding it. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it's really, yeah. So yeah, another thing about Arna is he encapsulates the theme of faith and doubt, is a big thing in there, because there is a holy war going on, so religion plays a big role. But yeah, faith and doubt, a big part of that, and
I get some vibes of a character from Mistborn with old Arna, with
oh,
with this
interesting.
with this. I mean, not exactly the same, but a favorite character in Mistborn is very tied to his faith and trying to understand this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, and of course Brandon Sanderson is, I think,
Hmm.
naturally a writer who would write about faith, probably.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah, cool. Yeah, well, thank you. It's really awesome for me to get little bits of feedback from readers, and we're having to dance around spoilers, so it's not
I
easy.
know.
But it's still fun for me to hear that.
And your next one is coming out this year as well. Like you
Yeah,
wrote all of these together before you were deciding to.
yeah, yeah. I actually, like I said, I've been working on them for more than 18 years. So they were all more or less ready. They've been ready. And I decided, you know what? I'm probably not going to get a traditional publisher. I had an agent actually, who was fantastic, great person, wonderful to work with, helped me improve the books too. And, post pandemic, when he was ready to pitch the trilogy, it became clear after the course of months that a lot of the publishers are just so behind. They have
Mhm.
so much going on, and they have certain directions they want to go in, and it's just so difficult. And now, I kept hearing too about how hard it is, because publishing is like this. You have to, my favorite way of describing it is, you have to win the lottery to be successful in publishing, to actually make a living as a traditionally published writer. You have to win the lottery 3 times. First time, you have to get an agent. The second
Mhm.
time, the agent has to get a publisher. The third time, the publisher actually needs to push your book, because 99% of books that publishers publish are basically neglected, are
Mhm.
forgotten, and don't make the money, don't make any sales. I mean, it's really sad. I have heard this
Mhm.
tale again and again and again. It's the vast majority of people who even break into publishing. Even then, hardly anyone knows about their book, because
Right.
the publisher will back what they see as their winner, and they'll put everything behind that, and they will let all the other books they publish wither and die.
Well, it's
So
great that you have this core of people that'll give your books a chance.
yeah, so I thought, because of that, why don't I self-publish?
Mhm.
It just made sense to say, okay, I'm going to self-publish. I've got this trilogy ready. People like finished trilogies, so I'll just do it all in 1 year, and that'll make hopefully readers happy, and more likely to give the series a try. And so I got control. Now, that would never happen in traditional publishing. No way would a publisher take 3 of your books and publish them in 1 year. I don't think that's ever
Mhm.
happened. So that's something I get to do because I'm self-publishing and I have creative control. I don't think any traditional publisher would have allowed me to have stained glass window book covers, because that's not a normal, that's in air quotes, everybody. That's not a normal fantasy cover to have a stained
Hmm.
glass window. So, I had the ability to say to my artist and cover designer, I want a stained glass window cover because that really fits with the religion themes and everything else. And I think it might be eye-catching because stained glass windows are very colorful. And, so that's where we went. And I'm happy
Yeah,
with it.
when you say that you were writing for 18 years, how much of that is kind of, I mean, obviously you're not writing for 18 years, but how much of it is casting and having these different adventures and taking people out and putting new people in? And when did you feel like you had where you wanted A to Z to go? Because obviously you probably went a million different ways. And some of those ways you probably wish you still could have it in some way, but maybe it didn't work. I'm curious about when you finally felt like, okay, now is time to, or were you writing it as you went? Like I'm curious about your journey and how you finally went from that spark to the end here.
Yeah. So first of all, I did not write straight through 18
Hmm.
years. We're talking mostly summers, actually, because I have to teach, I have to earn a living, do something that actually does make money. So,
Hmm.
so I wasn't writing year round. I was really mostly writing during the summers. So that said, I'm a planner. So I had the entire story outlined, from beginning to end, essentially, and with the idea that book one would be in sort of Joseph Campbellian terms. Book one would be the departure in mythological terms. So hero leaves the
Hmm.
womb, so to
He's
speak,
leaving
kicked
Tatooine.
out into the world, right?
Hmm.
Part two is transcendence. The hero has to transcend themselves in order to succeed in some important goal. And then part three is the return. So I had that structure in mind. And within that broad idea of departure, transcendence, and return, I had every chapter outlined. So I kind of knew what I was going to do from beginning to end. I did struggle with the very, very end, kind of back and forth and what I wanted to do, but I
Yeah.
ultimately settled on that. And then I just started writing. Now, as I wrote chapter by chapter, the story told me, no, you think you were going to go there, but no, you got to go here. And so sometimes the story pulled me places I didn't know I was going to go.
But
So,
you had your world already laid out that this was
yep,
going to, you knew what the themes, or you knew what basically the kinds of big moments you wanted to get for your characters.
yeah.
You just maybe didn't know how they were going to get there.
Yeah, I think what happens with me anyway is I get these, it's very visual for me, I guess, but I will get these images of the iconic moments, the key moments.
Hmm.
And those are things I know are going to be in the chapter. Sometimes I do have to flesh out, okay, how do I get there? Yeah. And then you figure that out. And that's part of the writing is it needs to be convincing, right? It needs to be convincing. You can't
Yeah.
just flash this big moment in front of your reader. It has to have the work that builds up to it in order for that moment to have its full effect. So I had certain moments that I hope I hope anyway people will say wow, or that's a key moment there. But yeah, getting there is also an important task because it needs to be convincing.
Hmm. Well, I think it was very interesting. Like by the end of your first book, I was quite invested with the main party. A couple of the characters, like you would have in a lot of these other books, and with Malazan, it was just something sparks, and it's like, and you think, oh, I wonder how I will view them when I go back and see their first sort of things. But I'm excited because I wasn't totally sure where we left off and who was in this little party and who branched off.
Yeah.
And it's very cool that in the prologue of number two, you can just start with a bang, having things established. And that must be nice that you don't have to maybe do some of that initial groundwork and laying the seeds. You can start to harvest a little bit.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Yeah. Thank
When
you.
is the third one coming out, by the way?
September 21 is the
Okay.
date. Yep.
Mm.
Yep. So
Okay.
yeah, I went with March 21, June 21, September 21, right around the seasonal changes. I don't know if that would help people remember or not, but
Hmm.
that's the idea I had in my head. But yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that that worked for you. I actually, little tidbit, little interesting fact, maybe. It is for me anyway. That originally the prologue of book two was at the end of book one.
I was going to say that it seems like such a climactic moment, but it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't need to be there
Yeah,
at the end of
well,
book one.
guess who suggested that I move it to the beginning of book two?
Someone I should know. AP
You got it, AP. Yes.
seems like something he would do.
Yeah, yeah, he's good with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an AP edit suggestion.
Hmm.
I think it was
Yeah.
brilliant. I think it was brilliant.
It was a great starting prologue. You could start at a high note instead of kind of scooping it back up. Yeah, it was great to remember where we were at. I thought it was, yeah, great
Yeah,
suggestion.
I'm very pleased with how that worked out. I just had to do a little tweak here and there, and essentially, yeah, I thought, okay, yeah, this really works. And it, I think, serves as a great opening for the second book, and I'm very pleased with that. And that's another thing, by the way, for your writing that I would very strongly suggest, especially if you're going to self-publish, which is to, if you can afford it, hire a really good developmental editor.
Hmm.
And if you feel like you're going to need help with the commas and the semicolons and all that, then a copy editor too. And sometimes they're two different. Some people will do both, but often they are separate roles. Copy editor versus a developmental editor. AP is a developmental editor where he does big idea stuff. He tends not to comment on the little tiny nuts and bolts, the grammatical stuff as much. And so I think that's an important thing, though, if you are going to self-publish, is if you can afford it, hire a really good editor because it will pay off in the end, I think, for your satisfaction, at least with your story. I don't know if monetarily it'll pay off,
Right.
but it'll pay off in terms of you feeling like you're able to put out your very best story.
Hmm. Hmm. Can I bring up Beowulf again?
Oh, let's do it. If you bring up Beowulf, just I have to warn you, we could be on Beowulf for a long time.
Hey, I have time. I have time.
Okay.
So it was my first time with this. And
Hmm.
so this is coming from somebody who, I don't know what has been said about this in the analysis and things like that, other than I have some things that I think about based on some of the stuff that we mentioned before.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, Grendel. Well, first, actually, starting off, and then we get this King Beowulf. And I thought, oh, this is Beowulf. I guess it's not.
Bayo, actually, his name was originally Bayo. Yeah.
Okay. What translation should I get, actually? I is there a best one?
I tend to prefer for teaching in translation the Seamus Heaney translation. Seamus Heaney
Okay.
was a poet from Northern Ireland who wrote a really, I think, lyrical, beautiful translation of the poem. So that's the one I would recommend. Which one do you have, by the way?
I have, I think, David Wright.
Okay, I'm actually not familiar with that one. Yeah, I haven't read it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
this first thing that starts off this whole issue, this
Yeah.
party that they have,
Yeah.
seems like they could have just kept it down a little bit or invited him.
Invite Grendel, sure. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I I assume the people that are reading this in those times, it's very Christian kind of base, but it also has very pagan sorts of elements about it. They would view someone like Grendel as being wholly unworthy of such a party. But they're having this party basically celebrating how happy they are and
Yeah.
how great things are going. And he goes on this rampage for 12 years. I think some of that could have been avoided, but that is maybe my surface level opening analysis on that. I
Okay.
I think only in I wonder how people view, or is his name Grendel? Oh yeah, it is Grendel. I, you feel a little sympathy about this Grendel until you see what he's capable of, and he holds a massive grudge.
Yeah,
Uh,
slight. Yeah, yeah. Now, Grendel, I should tell you, is in the Old English referred to many times. I don't know what your translation says, but it might say something like monster or something. But
mhm.
essentially, the word in Old English is aglach, which is where I took my word aglach from in my books. So you met the aglach in the swamp
Yeah,
in The Way of Eden. So essentially, that's kind of what I picture Grendel as, is this large, trollish, swampy kind of creature who is now, in order to explain what Grendel really is, I think we'd have to talk about who maybe the poet was and what the poet was trying to do. And I don't know if you want to get into all
oh
that.
yeah, no, I'm open for any of that.
Okay. So I'll try
Because
to
they
keep
mentioned that he's a part of these descendants of Cain.
Grendel
Uh,
is,
yeah,
yes. Yeah.
and hanging out with a whole bunch of other people down in this lake. But
Yeah.
I'll talk about the lake. That the lake is maybe the part that got me the most excited, but we can get there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we'll definitely get there. But in terms of what this poem is, you had a perhaps 8th century Christian
Hmm.
in what was a fairly recently converted, you know, part of the world to Christianity from the old religion, which was very much like, Old Norse mythology with Odin, only it's Woden and Thor and company. So they had their gods, their pantheon. And so this Christian poet of the 8th century took what was a traditional tale. We know it was because there are analogs in Old Norse of the troll killing part and the mommy part. So that part is very, very, very old. And this poet took that part and added the dragon part to it, but also infused it with a lot about religion, about God, and that sort of thing. Now, the characters in the poem are pagan. This is a Christian poet of the perhaps 8th century looking back on his pagan ancestors with a great deal of admiration for their courage and their loyalty and their honor. But also, I think, in my interpretation, a very strong sense of the futility of all that. The idea that you can win fame by doing great deeds so that your name will live on.
Yeah,
And maybe it sounds
very
courageous and
Achilles
noble,
like.
but you know what? In the end, from the Christian poet's perspective, it's ultimately futile.
Well, it seemed like at first, since it had a lot of that Christian, or actually more like Old Testament sort of.
There's no
uh
mention of the Gospels in
right.
Beowulf.
Yeah,
Yes.
you see the Old Testament coming out of there, and it
Yeah.
seems like at first it's like Beowulf is like this God sanctioned sort of hero of the day, but in the end, I wasn't quite sure what to make of what it is. This a cautionary tale of pride
It might
that
be.
got him in the end
I don't think
and
it's
left
a
the
I don't think it's a here's what happens when you're too proud, watch out. I don't think it's that. I do think it is a lament. The poem is essentially a lament for the past. There were these noble people who, from the Christian poet's perspective,
mhm,
lived without
the
hope of
Geats.
salvation. They lived without hope of salvation. So if you live without that hope, you resort to their idea of their heroic code, which is do great deeds and your name will live on. And it's, from the Christian poet's perspective, ultimately futile. So it does
Right.
end with a very pagan funeral with a sense of futility because Beowulf's people are going to be wiped out. So the
Yes.
whole thing begins and ends with a funeral, by the way. The
Right.
book
Right.
ended by these pagan funerals. So I don't think it's the poet in any way condemning his ancestors. It's more a sense of sorrow that here they were struggled mightily. They tried their best to live nobly, but all they had was this idea that in order to not get swallowed utterly by the darkness that surrounds our lives, you just do some great deeds. And that's all they had, right? So
Yeah.
that was this guy's I think, his take on his ancestors and what he was trying to accomplish in this poem. Now, Grendel, being the descendant of Cain, he adds that little tidbit in there. And from our perspective, it might seem weird. Like, why would you do that? But from his perspective, once again, who was Cain? Cain was the original murderer, right? He killed his brother Abel, and therefore he was outlawed. He was kicked out of civilization. Grendel also is a kind of outlaw. He is the monstrous. He is the other. He is the darkness.
Yeah.
In opposition to civilization and light and life. So from the Christian poet's perspective, that link makes sense between Cain and Grendel being forces of chaos outside the law, forces of darkness in opposition to the light. And Beowulf, who is the hero? The hero is the one who defends this fragile civilization in a very harsh world, and keeps the light going, right?
Right. Very interesting how
So
that all.
That's my take on it anyway. And that, I think that perspective makes some of the poet's choices make a lot more sense if you think of it from that direction.
Yeah. I love Grendel's mother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, love is maybe the wrong word, but I kind of had it kind of reminded me of Hagar, Ishmael's mom, thinking like, why was my son targeted for this thing? And I don't know. But the thing that caught me was the use of water in Beowulf, because this is a very, very big thing in mythology, and in all these mythologies, especially it's in Malazan.
Yep.
The water is this element that kind of embodies chaos. It's in Noah's Ark, lifted upon the water, and then people going across the Red Sea, and there's a guy that could walk on water. But it's interesting that since they would have that baseline, it starts with Beowulf having this great journey. Nothing bad happened. It seemed like this is sanctioned for him to come over and do this. And then he gets insulted by this. What was the guy's name that insulted him, saying he can't even swim too well, which is a funny insult.
Yeah, that is, oh gosh, and he gives him his sword later on. Unfairth.
Yeah. That guy. And he committed the same crime as Cain, who they all have already outcasted. And anyway, very interesting.
Slayer, yeah, that's a deliberate echo. Yeah.
And he said, you weren't even a great swimmer. How is this going to go? He said, well, dummy, I was out treading waters for 5 days or whatever it was, and I slayed 9 sea monsters. And I just love, I mean, I'm not even at the lake part, but I am obsessed with Moby Dick as well, because it has that same sort of thing. I'm obsessed with the Leviathan, that kind of just what it represents as this most impossibly, you can't defeat it. It lives in the chaos, and you need, anyway.
Well, be careful, Dan, because Ahab also was obsessed with Moby Dick.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And I don't want my leg to get chopped off. Right. But I'm obsessed with the way that is used in a lot of our literature. Kind of has that great white kind of monster or whatever. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that he was out doing that. So obviously chaos is something that he's able to kind of overcome here. And then we get Grendel's mother coming out of this lake where it has the depths that we can't even find the bottom of it. And within this boiling lake of gore and blood and monsters, he goes in with this sword, which very interesting that the sword wouldn't work. But anyway, he goes down, and I love just the theming of him going down to this bottom of this chaotic lake and finding this ultimate monster where he has a lot of trouble with this Grendel's mom.
Much more trouble with the mother than he does with Grendel, in fact. Yes. Yeah,
Hmm.
so she's the matriarch, and as such, maybe represents an older culture or something. It's really interesting because that is exactly what happens in the analogs too. In the Old Norse versions of this story, the hero slays the initial troll that had been persecuting the locals, and then follows a blood trail because the monster got away minus an arm. Follows a blood trail to what actually in the Old Norse versions is a waterfall, and so the hero has to go
Right.
behind the waterfall into a cave, and there encounters the mother and has a much harder time with her. So it's a pattern. Yeah.
A waterfall.
Yeah. And
Okay.
actually, if you look at the Old English
I
version,
mean, that was in Harry Potter as well. That enchanted
sure.
waterfall going down, and yeah. I mean, I don't
Yep.
want to just mention Harry Potter,
I
but
kind of like the chaos and the weirdness of the Old English version that he goes down, 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 and then he's taken.
mhm.
But if you think about it for a moment, it's hard to make sense of it because she grabs him and brings him into a cave.
Right,
Whereas the Old Norse version works a little bit better, right? Because the cave is behind the waterfall, right?
right, right. And then he finds this giant sword, which is supposed to be either
Yeah,
from some kind of, if this is on a Christian basis, this would be some kind of pre-Diluvian giant sword that's been
correct.
dragged into there, and very interesting that that would work. Uh, but I assume, yeah, my mind is just going with a million different ways as I go through this, but all these different hobgoblins and things that were supposed to be kind of like the mixing of, the unholy mixing of breeds and things like that that just should be wiped out.
Yeah.
Grendel would never be allowed to be at this kind of party. Uh, and it's interesting that it would happen with this giant sword, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of that yet, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of a lot of these moments in between these big battles. uh
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the cool part. So let's talk about that. There are these little side stories you're talking about. So
yeah.
when they're celebrating the slaying of Grendel's mother, they come back to Heorot, and the bard is singing a tale of Sigmund the Dragon Slayer, or that sort of thing, or the tale of Hildeberg, whose son and brother were slain during basically what was supposed to be a banquet celebrating an alliance that sort of erupted into a brawl, and a bunch
Hmm.
of people got killed. So why do we have these side stories? Now, the cool thing is, Old English poetry comes out of oral formulaic tradition, and as such, people told stories a bit differently in those cultures. They were much more associative, kind of like the way my mother would tell a story. She would start with a story, and then it would remind her of something else, and she'd go off on this tangent, which becomes another story, and then
Right.
that would remind her of something. And eventually, we get back to the original story,
Yeah,
right?
I have the worst. I do that and I never get back to the original thing is the problem.
So you would have fit right uh,
Yeah.
in the oral formulaic culture. But yeah, no, that's kind of what it is. It's associative. So what the bard or the poet is doing there in inserting these moments, these are thematic echoes. These are
Hmm.
thematic echoes. So why tell the story of Sigmund the Dragon Slayer? Because the poet and the bard in the story are comparing Beowulf to Sigmund and putting Beowulf in the pantheon of heroes. He's comparing Beowulf's deed to Sigmund's deed of slaying the dragon. And by the way, in Old Norse, it's Sigurd, the son of Sigmund, who does it, but whatever. Why tell the story of Hildeberg, who loses her son and her brother, and eventually also her husband in this feud? Because the entire poem is about how life is fleeting, and all of our attempts to elongate or live on are ultimately futile. And there's a sorrow to this. That's why this whole poem is a lament. And this is yet another instance of how our fragile efforts to build civilization, to prolong our lives, are all going to end in darkness.
Hmm.
And so it's just this beautiful, poignant moment where this woman is mourning her son and her brother. And ultimately, our fragile human efforts, this is a Christian poet's perspective, keep in mind, our fragile human efforts are going to be for nothing. They're all going to get wiped away. That is the nature of life in this world. You see it again with the tale of the last survivor. Where did the dragon's hoard come from? You get a little side story telling you, well, it was the treasure of this people who was wiped out. They were wiped out by disease and war. And there was this last survivor who hid this treasure away in this cave that eventually the dragon would discover. And this last survivor laments and says, okay, here's all this treasure now. And that's so not only is the treasure thereby, there's an aura of a curse around it, but you get that theme of futility once again, that you can't buy eternity with this treasure. It ultimately sits there rotting under this dragon. So these side stories really do feed into the theme of the main poem is really just 3 monster slayings, right? Beowulf kills Grendel, Beowulf kills Grendel's mother, Beowulf kills a dragon. But all this other
moment do you know what moment I could just see Steven Erikson writing is when Grendel's mother comes in and just messes up the place, and Beowulf comes in and says, how was your night? Like, I just thought that was hilarious. I could hear Kruppa or someone saying that. Just hilarious. And it's funny to see some of those. I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but I think it's funny.
It kind of is. And then poor Hrothgar explains, well, Grendel has a mommy. She killed my best bud.
Oh, right. It was his,
his best friend. And then Beowulf says, mourn not. Basically Beowulf espouses the heroic code right there and then. He says, don't mourn. In this life, the only way to live on is to do great deeds, so the bards will sing of you, and he resolves to go get Grendel's mother as well, because that's why he's there. Yeah, he's there to help people and that, but he's also really there to do great deeds.
Right.
So
and to
will live on.
He wants to be immortalized and things.
Yep.
Yeah, it was that last battle that left me a little murky about. That'll take a few passes, I think. And I would like to read J.R.R. Tolkien's essays that I know he did those on that.
Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics. Yeah.
Right. I know in the Lord of the Rings extended editions, they talk about that. And I usually just skip through the Beowulf parts, but now I gotta stick around and see what they have to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, that last moment, the downfall of Beowulf, I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting that eventually he does one more thing, and it almost is like by doing that. I mean, the dragon came and ravaged the town, but went home, right? He didn't have to do this.
He went back to his cave. He needed to get vengeance, though, because the old heroic code, the pagan code, says vengeance. If someone kills your brother, you are morally obligated to kill that person or get weregeld payment.
But look what it got him, though.
Yep.
It's an interesting way of looking at that.
Again and again and again, you have these wars going on, and people, whole tribes getting wiped out, including Beowulf's, because after he's gone, the Geats will disappear because the Swedes, and historically that actually happened. That tribe.
Yeah. I went and looked up because I've seen the Geats, but I didn't know. Yeah, I don't know much about them, but I read about that and thought, oh, that actually they were vulnerable and they got wiped out.
Yep. There actually are some historical seeds in the poem. There are references in Roman or Latin to Hugelac, who is Beowulf's uncle. There are Old Norse references to Hrothgar, who was a Danish king. There's some little bits of history mixed in there.
Yeah, and in your book, and in Memories, or not in Memories of Ice, and in Reaper's Gale. I mean, in your book, there's the tale of this horrible thing. I mean, I don't know if that's actually how it happened, but it's this horrible cautionary tale of just this awful mess that got started by these two people that just kind of their arrogance or their pride or whatever the way you put it caused this mess. And right now I am right in this I'm early on in Reaper's Gale, and there is kind of this mess between this kingdom over here and the Aldan, and it had a little bit of that in there too.
Sure.
Yeah. And Red Mask or whatever his name. I finally met him just yesterday, kind of got more of what's going on, and just so excited. I love that kind of thing. But yeah, for Beowulf specifically, that ending really got me where I thought
Yep.
it's a potential for a light bulb moment, but I'm going to have to sit on it for a while.
It should be ambiguous, I think. The final words that the poet gives for Beowulf after his people have buried him with this treasure, which will do them no good because and they're going to get wiped out, is that he was the keenest to win fame. There are all these words of praise, and then it ends with that last half line, keenest to win fame, which you feel like is a bit double-edged. You know, in the pagan culture, keenest to win fame, great. In the Christian culture,
that's pride. That's
pride.
a downfall.
It's futility.
That's David beating Goliath, but then after saying, "Look what I did," and then it became it's very interesting.
And even Wiglaf, who was the one warrior who was loyal, he was the one.
The one that didn't run away.
Who did not run away, who came and helped Beowulf kill the dragon. Without his help, Beowulf couldn't have killed the dragon.
What did he do in that fight?
He stabbed the dragon before Beowulf could, and then the dragon was weakened, and Beowulf helped finish it off, essentially.
Right.
So Wiglaf was essential there. But even Wiglaf says something to the effect, it depends on how you do the translation, but you could use the word pride, but often because of one man's pride, many are harmed. And he is so loyal to Beowulf, but even he recognizes that they're toast now because their strong leader is gone.
Yeah.
In this act of vengeance.
Let it go.
And Beowulf is very clear. He knows he's going to die doing this, but he loves the idea of going out with a bang. You know, going out. I mean, who could not tell a story about a guy who gets killed while killing a dragon, right?
Right. Right. And he stabbed it in his mouth, right? Or in the top of its head or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think in its neck or something.
Okay. Maybe it doesn't matter so much, but he cut off the head of the last two. Yeah. Very interesting that after poor Grendel, I mean, they should have invited him, and then after killing him, maybe don't have his arm like on display. I mean, obviously a mom
kind of
would
rubbing
be a little
in, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of moments where they didn't need to get to that point. So that's my initial analysis.
I like it.
Of that.
By the way, another thing that I do in my books, which is very much I'm inspired by Beowulf, is the little side stories I talked about. I don't do it quite as much, obviously, but I do have a lot of, I have a bard telling a story. I have these stories within the story.
What was his name again?
Aben. Aben is the bard.
Right.
Yeah. He's called a shaper, which is really from the Old English word shop, which is one who shapes, who creates, right? Which is a really cool...
man, don't tell me that. Now I'm going to be okay. Yeah. Oh, geez. Okay. Very, very cool. Because now I think, sorry, I don't want to, a part of this whirlwind in House of Chains, it has this, anyway, I was obsessed with this creation. Just, we have Karsa in there and Felice, and it's like this creation is keeping them, it's like fighting off the chaos in some way. Anyway, now that you're saying that, I think, okay, as a shaper, I didn't know that. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that guy.
Yep.
Sorry, keep going. What you were saying.
Yeah, no, I was just saying I have a lot of stories within stories. So the bard telling a story. I have a later character in book 3 who sings. I have parables later on. These kinds of things are all, to me, opportunities to reinforce the themes I'm trying to explore, and maybe from different angles. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do with those stories within the stories, just in case people are tempted to skip the poems, which I'm sure many people are.
I'm dying to know what Dayraven ends up doing with people's advice in this next book.
Yes.
Because we've had some warnings and things, and we don't know, obviously there are wise characters. Like I wouldn't go against Obi-Wan or Gandalf, but I'm dying to know maybe where that's going to go. And also,
you'll see early on. Yeah.
Good. I thought I was going to see in book 1, but things diverge. Okay. One of the things that has me so hooked with Malazan is in so many fantasy books, and I love it. You have your Harry, which is kind of everything rests on Harry. Everything rests on maybe Dayraven. I don't know. Maybe it's rests on a bunch of shoulders. Everything rests on Frodo. But in Malazan, I've thought, man,
Very different. Yeah.
so I mean, we have our main characters, but it's not like any one person has the key to 51%, where if they do it, as long as it all rests on them, we will be okay. It seems like there's so many people that just have a little key to 2 or 3% of the story,
Yes.
and it's just boggling to see how they link with one another, and meaningful stories that could all be
Yep.
on their own. Just awesome. Just
Yeah, I
awesome.
think to accomplish something like that, you have to have something on that scale, and very few people would ever be able to really pull that off. So yeah, my take on that has always been that what Erickson achieves in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is giving us a sense of our place in the universe, a truer sense of our place in the universe than most fantasy does. Because if you read most
Mhm.
fantasy, the central protagonist or group of characters are very important. They're outsized in terms of their importance and what they do. But in reality, you and I, Dan, I'm afraid to tell you this, but you probably know already, we're kind of little, you know,
Mhm.
we're very little, you know, it's like my favorite, I guess, analogy, and I've used it many times, but is if you watch one of those films about the origins of the universe, right? And you find, okay, here's little planet Earth, where, by the way, it's huge in comparison to you and me. It's been around 4.5 billion years, and you know, in that scale, our lives are just not even a blink. You know,
Mhm.
we're little pieces of dust on this planet. But by the way, this planet is a piece of dust ejected by the sun, you know, which is much, much, much bigger. But by the way, that's just one average sized star in this galaxy of billions and billions of them. And oh, by the way, this is just one galaxy in billions and billions of galaxies. And you leave thinking, yeah, I mean, just you can't wrap your mind around all that.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
Erickson does for me is something similar. He makes me understand, yeah, I'm part of all this. I'm connected with all this, but I'm really just a small part. I'm not more important than
Yeah.
anyone else. Yeah, I'm important because I'm part of all this, but I'm not the hero. I'm not going to save the universe by myself, right?
Yeah. And a lot of ways people have pitched Malazan is that names are fleeting. They kind of come and go. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, there's some pretty mainstay people that have stuck around,
Yeah.
even though you don't see them for a while. There's a couple people from Memories of Ice where I'm like, where the heck are they? They were a favorite group, but uh,
Sometimes Esselmont will answer those questions for you. Not always, but sometimes. If you read the novels of the Malazan Empire, you'll find out, oh, that's what happened to that character.
but as someone who likes history, I mean, names are fleeting in history,
There you
but
go.
they are just little keys. So I think that's what I've really enjoyed. The first two books, I thought, I don't know. I mean, I don't know really what's going on. I know that I like what this person is doing, so I'll root for them. But I don't know if they are part of a group I totally like or da 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 da. But by the time we get to the third book, we finally get some answers to, okay, well, at least this is a bad guy that we can all agree we don't like this bad guy. And we might not have any heroes that have, unless everyone's just laughing at me and the crippled god is, maybe I got it all wrong about old crippled god. Maybe, anyway.
I would never
Yeah.
laugh at you, Dan. I just wouldn't.
Okay. Well, I have some people laughing when I make some pretty awful takes. But I like that the hero side is quite, and I don't mind when we have a main hero, often with a father's, their father was a blacksmith or something and gave him a sword. And I love that. I love that. But in this, it's more spread out among all these different people just living their life. And
Yeah.
then it's like, yeah, we have a few great focal points for what we should definitely, for people who we definitely don't want to get their way. But it's an amazing take on some of those very early oral stories of order versus chaos. It
Yeah.
maybe the best.
It is for me. It definitely is for me. And you know, it's interesting because you mentioned history. Erickson and Esselmann were both archaeologists,
Hmm.
which, you know, there's a bit of a rivalry between archaeologists and history. And you've noticed, I'm sure, that you've met a couple of their historians, or at least
Hmm.
one definitely in
They can be
Deadhouse
pretty
Games.
arrogant.
That's the thing about history, and you pay attention to whenever an historian is in one of the epigraphs. Like, pay attention to the tone.
Right.
What is Erickson doing with the tone in the epigraph? If an historian is sort of giving a sermon about what's what, and the idea is that, well, actually, we pretend we have this narrative, right? And we pretend that that is the truth, and
Right.
that's official now, right? But in reality, we don't really know a lot. And archaeologists, I think, are probably forced to face up to this more than historians in some way, because they get this object that they have to sort of, and sometimes it's fun to watch them interpret objects and extrapolate from the things they find and say, oh, this was obviously a sacred object, that, and for all we know, it was a
Yeah.
back scratcher or something,
Yeah, I have this guy in this book now who under his estate is falling apart and he's finding these objects and I don't know what they are and he doesn't know what they are and
Yeah.
who knows? There's just so much to uncover.
But that sense of layer upon layer upon layer
Oh,
of history and civilization, and in the case of Malazan, it's hundreds of thousands of years we're talking about the scale.
do you know what Malazan is so good at? Instead of thinking of time as this horizontally linear thing, it's very much vertical, where just the further you go down, it's just so
It's the
great.
layers. The archaeologist perspective is that's the layers, right? Yeah.
And the whole there's some great stuff. There's some great stuff in there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not even that it's layers and layers of stuff on the earth. You're peeling away layers and layers of people's prejudices that they've had for years and years and years, just a million things where it's pulled at.
That
It's
is for
just
sure.
amazing. The
That is for sure.
Ototaro swords are cool, hey?
Oh my goodness. I wish I had one.
Oh
But
my gosh. What a cool way to, I mean, usually swords have this extra element of power and stuff, but it's like, leave me alone. These leave me alone swords.
yeah,
Just so cool.
that is pretty cool. Yeah, there are some cool swords in Malazan. That is for sure. There's that little one that Anamanda Ray carries around with him. That's a
Mm.
pretty cool sword. There's in the so you would encounter this a little bit later. So I won't say anything about it, but there is a type of sword that appears way back in the Carcanis books that makes a sort of reappearance later in the series. It's a kind of blink and you'll miss it sort of thing, but it's pretty cool, I think. But yeah, there are some very interesting swords in for sure as swords as objects. You can see again I
Mhm.
think the archaeologists in them with that. Of course, fantasy in general
Yeah.
is pretty obsessed with swords and
Yeah, and sometimes, like I said, I mean, I love the scene in Star Wars where Luke gets his father's lightsaber by
lightsaber,
Obi-Wan, and it's
which
just
is
this
really a
passing
fancy sword.
along.
Yeah.
Yes, and it very much is like having the father right there, even though the father's out choking people who fail him. But it's like he's having his father there kind of along the way. And you see that in a lot of different things. I think in Faithful and the Fallen, the father makes those swords, right? He's a blacksmith. Doesn't he give a
Corbin's
sword?
father is a blacksmith. Yes, I remember that. I don't know if did he make the? Maybe you're right. He made a
I
sword.
don't think he earned that sword. I think he maybe made it, but
Okay.
yeah, I love that kind of theme where it's like even though they're off, maybe exiled or on this quest, it's
Yeah.
like having their father really being like their shield beside them. Anyway, they do that a lot, which
So
I
you
think
mentioned
is
Star Wars. That's a
mhm.
very formative the original trilogy for me. The
Oh
first film
yeah.
I remember seeing in a theater was in 1977 was Star Wars.
Hmm.
The first Star Wars film, which
Well, I dressed up for episode one the first day thinking this is going to be awesome. And
nice.
it was kind of fun, but yeah, the original trilogy was big for me too.
Cool. Yeah. And you've been watching it recently again, I think, right?
Yeah, my daughter, I'm starting to open up to some new things. She's been obsessed with things like Back to the Future and the Three Amigos and stuff that I really liked. I've I've been trying to kind of work on my spouse to let her watch Jurassic Park and things. I mean, I'm going to wait on Indiana Jones, but I watched Jurassic Park at her age. I mean, I watched it when I was 8 or something like that.
Yeah.
But sorry, what did you say for Star Wars, right?
Star Wars,
You
yeah, but
love
I
Star
should
Wars?
I should mention that don't tell your wife or your partner this, but I let my older daughter watch Lord of the Rings when she was 4, and she still sort of elbows me about it. Like, you
Yeah.
traumatized me, Dad.
Well, I was the youngest of 8 kids.
Oh,
So I
okay.
remember walking into the room of the last Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade right when his hair's growing out, and I freaked out. It was the scariest thing ever for
Oh
me.
yeah.
And I was scared of ET for decades. I
ET's
mean,
a little creepy. Yeah, yeah.
oh, well, maybe not decades, but a long time. Yeah. And so she's been watching Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah. How's that been going?
We did 4, 5, and 6, as you should.
Yeah.
And she took, I mean, she's 9 years old. She took a little bit of coaching on some of the things, like, what does Han Solo really do? Like, why is he here, and what is going on here? But once she had some of that thing, she was really good at seeing some foreshadowing.
Nice.
For example, with the Cloud City,
Oh
she
yeah.
was seeing that this
Lando
was
Calrissian.
definitely not going to go well. And
Yeah.
at the end, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Return of the Jedi for
Yeah.
people,
Cook your ears.
when yeah, when Luke is fighting Darth Vader and she's looking at this emperor and thinking, man, this guy's so evil, specifically because he's just relishing in the son killing the father, and
Yeah.
it's just,
Capping
yeah.
people. Yeah.
Hmm. So I thought she really, really liked it. In the first 3, she liked the first one a fair bit. I mean, it might have been because she knew a little bit how I felt about it, and she's that kind of keener a little bit. But
Yeah.
she liked it, and she wants to watch them over and over now. But yeah, she loved Harry Potter. I read through the whole series with her last year, so
Nice.
it's fun to kind of see that through her eyes.
Have you tried The Hobbit with her yet?
I haven't, but I would like to do that. That's on our list of things to do as well. I think we did the first page and she was like, this language is just not working for me or something. She wasn't quite grabbing it. We are on Tress of the Emerald Sea right now.
Oh, okay. Brandon Sanderson. Yeah.
Yeah, and it took her she gave up on it at around 60, page 60 or something, because it was, nothing really happened. She was bored about this island and said, this is dumb. And then we got a little further in, and now she's ready to go. But yeah,
Okay.
I love she loves stories too. So wherever they're found, whether they're Roman stories or I just can't wait to show her some of these books. And I've loved going through these movies and things with her. It's just so fun.
Yeah, it is the greatest. Yeah.
Hmm.
I really am. The daughter that I traumatized made a video with me about bonding over books, and it is one of the best parts of my life, has really been sharing stories with my daughters. So I have, like you, I think a lot of great people have 2 daughters for some reason, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it must be, must
Yeah.
be. Yeah. Speaking of traumatizing, when I was on this Roman kick with her, she wanted to read. She wanted to read about all these, or hear all these stories, and I decided, why don't I tell her a little bit about the Assyrians? And she did not like what I was telling her about the old Assyrians and the kind of stuff that they could do. And she put an end to that, and she didn't want any history stories for about 2 months after that, because it really, really freaked her out. And she was
Yeah.
about 8 or something.
Yeah. I could see some of that being slightly disturbing. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that is one of the ways we can connect with our kids. And I think
It was
it's
so fun. It was the
yeah.
best reading Harry Potter with her. And it doesn't even matter that it was Harry Potter, but it was just seeing her uh connect with something that is, you put the book down and she's still thinking about it. We come back at it, and she's thinking about these stories in a different way that she's never experienced quite before.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
very
very,
cool.
very cool.
Yeah.
And
And you
even
were,
for people who want to read those books, maybe the first three are a little childish, but I think you could coast on the first movies and start with maybe five. I think the fifth book, The Order of the Phoenix, is a legit great book.
I like the first three books myself.
Yeah, I do too. But yeah,
Yeah, you're young enough to have grown up on Harry Potter and then had the chance to read it to your kids, which is really cool. I was an adult already when
hmm
it came out, but I did get to share it with my two daughters. It was fun, a lot of fun. Yeah.
my mom bought me that. Man, when did those even come out? She bought me the trilogy of the first three, and then
I
she
think the
wanted to
first
read
one
them to
came out
me.
in, I want to say 97, 96, 97, somewhere around there.
Okay. So I was probably 13 or 14 or 15. I don't know when the trilogy. Uh, and I put my nose up at it because I
Uh-huh.
was into all my sports and things, and like the NFL is a major part of my life even now.
Huh.
And just other things that were so not fantasy at the time, but that really was a formidable thing, or what is the foundational thing to really get me back into that sort of
Yeah.
world. And I should mention, really, where this writing thing came for me about 15 years ago, whenever Kickstarter, there was a lot of board games and things being kickstarted, and I thought I'm going to develop some kind of little board game.
Huh.
And I was into character design, and I hired someone. I got my two cousins, or a couple cousins, to do some cool sketches, and I hired someone to do the paint, and I wanted to do this kind of fantasy based thing. But
Wow.
I soon found that I was just filling up the pages of these cards with lore. So I was working on all this backstory, but when it came to actually making the game, I just want to make the lore and stuff. So
Uh-huh.
eventually we put it away, but I've kept all that. And it was like 7 or 8 years of kind of working on the lore of this silly place. So that's really at the foundation too of what I thought. If I ever, I'm not going to do this board game because people won't get the lore and I stink at doing the rules. It wasn't my skill set. But I thought one day I would like to tell some of these little character stories and things like that. And it would just be so great to, I think, I can't remember if Steven Erickson, how he put it in one of these books, but it was something like being able to finally almost telekinetic, or not telekinetic, transfer over from your brain to someone else's is just a very special sort of experience. I would love to be able to finally get that done. And if anything, I want to write it for my kids because I know my oldest one would have a blast with some of these moments and would probably laugh a lot at some of
Yeah.
them.
Oh,
Yeah.
you'll do it. You'll absolutely do it. Yeah, just keep at it, keep at it, keep at
I
it.
think I think for this November month, that's, people like to do that. I think I'm going to take a fresh approach at trying to get a first draft of some of it, but we'll
Cool.
see. We'll see.
Wow. Wow. I wish so you would describe it as a fantasy then, what you're working on.
Well, it's very much, other books that have been very big in my life were Frankenstein and Dracula
Okay.
and all that, the Headless Horseman. And so it has more of that kind of, it's not that, but it has that kind of
Bit of
element to
classic
it.
horror vibe.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Interesting.
And it might have some characters from those things that we're familiar with, but not really. Yeah, it's kind of it's borrowing a little bit from some of those kinds of things. But yeah,
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed putting it together, and some of these. Yeah, I love Dracula. I love Frankenstein. I love, if there was any character that I think about the most, it's probably Frankenstein.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to think about there. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to do one of these explorers things just with Frankenstein. He's
That
the
would be
one that I
cool.
think about the most.
You
Yeah,
should do it.
I
Yeah.
love him because, and I'll just say, I mean, everyone loves, I think people love Frankenstein pretty universally. I would just say, please go to the novel if you haven't, because
Yeah.
he's so he's so different and nuanced and eloquent in a lot of ways,
Philosophical. Yeah.
philosophical, and think I think people would love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as well as Dracula and
Yeah.
other things. But
Yeah. Not the
yeah,
green guy with the electric bolt sticking out of his neck. And
oh, he's such a doofus. I still love him. I still love him, but he's just not my Frankenstein that I think of. Uh, yeah.
yeah. No, you should definitely. I think that would be cool. Is to explore Frankenstein on your channel. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to do some of that. But like I was saying, I have no idea where this is going to go. I have
Yeah.
no idea. I mean, it it'll always be secondary to what I would like to do, but as long as there's people that would enjoy it, then why not? If I'm already going to be reading some of these books.
Oh
So,
yeah. I think
mhm.
that's why we're all here, really, is to celebrate our love of stories and our fascination with them and how they work as well. I think you'll find a lot of people, even if they don't intend to be writers, are fascinated by how storytelling works. So it's a fun thing to gather around in this community, that's for sure.
Yeah,
And
it's been great.
yeah, I'm really glad you're part of it, and I hope people will check out your channel, Dan Explores Books. There, of course, will be a link in the description, and so yeah, head over there. Especially if you're a Malazan fan and you haven't yet discovered Dan's content, you will find a lot of really fun stuff, a lot of cool stuff. So I highly recommend it. And Dan, I just want to thank you for spending this time with me. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed watching your videos and seeing what you bring, which is fantastic. A very fresh voice to our BookTube community. So I am looking forward to whatever it is you decide to do after you're done with Malazan.
Right. Well, thank you too. When I was trying to get back into or trying to explore fantasy, I found a couple of your lists that have obviously kind of blown up and done really well, and those have been great starts to my journey in this area, and it's been so fun. It's been so fun. I've met a lot of cool people too.
Yeah, they're just great folks in this community. So yeah, that is,
Hmm.
that's what storytelling really is ultimately about, is making these connections, I think. So yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time.